everyone. Welcome back to Seaburbs Podcast. I'm your host, Brooke Deschelle, and today's guest is Susan and Charles. Hi, Susan and Charles.
Hello.
Thank you all so much for being a guest today.
Thank you for having us.
So can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourselves, both of you?
You want me to go? Did you say you wanted me to go first?
Yes.
Okay. I'm from Greenwich Village, New York City. I grew up in the East Coast. I went to college in the East Coast, and then I moved to the West Coast and I studied what you studied. I was a psychology major, but I then switched to theater. And then I started to become an actress and a dancer. And so that meant leaving. My college was in the Boston area. So I moved back to New York, joined a theater company in the Village. We did a show that we rehearsed for 16 months and performed 4 times, but that, okay, good performances. And then I got tired. I don't think I'm a commercial actress, writer. I'm not, but I'm also, I didn't like the New York scene in the 80s. I just didn't like it. It didn't relate to me. So I moved to California. I moved to Oakland and became part of more socially conscious art. And I started a series of theater companies. And I learned how to tap dance because it's an indigenous American art form. We wanted to use our stories. This part I'm serious about. We wanted to use our stories in our plays. And we did a lot of cabaret. We did a lot of tap dancing and singing. But we wanted to tell people in our audiences stories that related to life in this country, in this world. And so we started to do that in San Francisco very successfully with different companies, and we got a lot of grant money. And then San Francisco just got, does anyone from San Francisco watch on Louisville before I get an egg thrown at the screen? San Francisco got too small too, because it was a series of small theater companies, and we had our own small theater company. So we moved to LA, and I became a part of couple of large organizations, and then our company got invited. I'm sorry, I'm going on so long. We got invited by LA's equivalent of the New York Public Theater. It's called the Los Angeles Theater Center, and they were the big deal equity theater. And they asked our company to come and be in residence, and they would do all of our plays. So that was very nice, and it led me out of theater with Charlie, who was always brilliantly leading the band and doing the lead roles. And so I just didn't want to do that anymore. I didn't want to work so much in collaboration. It's very hard to work with actors. I know I'm unbearable to work with. And I'm unpleasant about, how did my costume get smaller since last week? Or producer, who was also me, would have to say, the costume didn't get smaller. Maybe you got a little, no, that must be it. So then we did theater and theater and theater and theater. And then then the LA theater scene got sort of clobbered by an equity set of contracts that they put out throughout the country. And small theater had a hard time. And I started to write a book. He had already written 3 successful books. And I thought, I can sit in the bedroom and argue with myself. I don't have to have someone tell me I look fat in my costume, because it's always me. So I wrote a book, and I found someone, Deborah, who you know, I found someone to take it around. It's a very strange time right now. So to cut it short, I found someone to help me get the book published, and that's what I'm looking to do. It's my second book. My first book was already published, and really did nicely in a world in which I'm not doing this to get rich. I would like people to hear my stories. That's me. And I've ended up a novelist, and we're involved in the American Library Association and other big literary stuff. Our stuff is being well received because we're smart, and we work really hard. We're old. Okay.
Nice. What about you, Charles?
Okay. Well, I was born back east as well. I was born in Boston and grew up on the East Coast. But I also, surprise, had a whole branch of our family who lived in California. And from childhood, and then during the time I was in college, I began going back and forth between Boston, where I went to school, and then California. Having not met Susan yet, I was solo on my own. And I was an actor from a very young age, and also a musician. I played a lot of folk music during the folk music craze of, I'm going to date myself now, the 60s.
You can't date yourself, sweetie. Married.
And so I was doing that. And at the same time, I had a very strong, as did Susan, political awareness of what was going on in the country and in the world, especially during the 60s as the civil rights movement grew and many people like us kind of joined in where we could, when we could. And so that was an interesting other part of my life. And I'll speak for Susan, also her life. She was an activist as well. And then the Vietnam War came along. And so during that time, I was, as I say, back and forth between the East Coast and California. But I found that I wasn't much of an activist, community organizer type person. I worked for a while doing that, but I really was like a musician and an actor, and I was a prolific reader and writer. So I went to California, and there I landed in a very left-wing, different connotation then, but a very left-wing theater company. I thought, this is it. I can combine my political awareness with my art. It was incredible, and it blew my mind. So at that point, I became really, my path was ahead of me. I was in my early 20s. And so I was performing a lot all over the country with this company that was doing anti-war plays. And we were doing also plays, about racism and believe it or not, sexism. So it was at that point, doing that kind of work in San Francisco, that I met this very talented woman who was doing political cabaret. And quite really, I was very impressed because it was just the kind of thing I was like to do. So I introduced myself, and she. I said, this is a beautiful thing, what you're doing. And of course, she didn't believe me. And she started arguing with me about, no, it wasn't a thing. So we did that for a while. But that was the beginning of a partnership that lasts till today. As you know, we had gone, it's like, okay, acting, theater. All right. What about the books? So, I kind of pulled out of all that, continued to play music, but I was also returning to my first love, which was writing, and that is where I have been for about for quite a while. I can't even think of how long. So I've been writing novels, and where they are, there they are.
Yeah.
I've been writing novels since the late 90s, historical novels, largely set during the time of the our resistance movements in the 60s. So this is part of a trilogy of novels that I wrote called the Resistance Trilogy. So that's been my work. I just finished the last one at the end of last year. So that's where I am.
Yeah, I want to talk about a few of your books. Both of your books. I went on both of your websites and I was like, wow, these are interesting books. So I want to talk a little bit about your books. So Susan, you can start first. I can bring up your website so my listeners can see what your books look like.
Oh boy. Okay, those aren't all books, but you see the book. And then I have a second book
I was trying to go on there to see, but it goes to that. I don't know why it goes to that when I do it.
I don't know either. The page just isn't. We haven't worked on this website because we've been working on a project for ALA. We don't know. It took a lot of work, and we're getting okay. So
So if you go to books,
I've written a
does it-
second book called 44 Horatio Street, which now has, you know what this goes like. I have 500 people interested in it, and that'll mean nothing. I'm kidding about that. But I have a lot of interest in the book. It's a book about growing up in Greenwich Village, as I said. But in my house that I grew up in were all the beat poets. They lived there. And the book, The Road Not Taken, is a total fantasy that I just wrote about. She's 50 years old, the protagonist. I've watched a lot of my friends kind of not feel they've lived their whole life, you know, their completed life. And then her husband dies at the beginning of the book. And she goes on a fantasy trip with a bunch of people who have been here since the beginning of the planet and who show her what life could be and teach her, because she's a nice person, but she hasn't ever done anything. And that they teach her that the planet needs gentleness and love. I know this sounds very Bugs Bunny, but it's not. It's so she learns magical realism. It's a magical realist book. She's taken to other planets. She's taken to other time zones. And the second book, 44 Horatio Street, is a real book about Allen Ginsberg and oh my God, Paul Robeson. Do you know that name?
No.
Okay. Look it up one day if you feel like. He was a very, very fascinating man. He was the first Black man to get a PhD from Harvard, and he played the first Black man who ever got to play Othello instead of a white man. Paul Robeson was really famous in the 50s in this country. He's in my book because he lived in my house that I'm writing about. He visited the house. He didn't live there. But Allen Ginsberg visited, and why can't I think of the name? Jack Kerouac visited. And then there was a murder committed by one of them. One of the beats committed a murder. This is well-known history. And got away with it on the grounds that he had killed a gay man.
Oh.
And the law in that day still said killing a gay man, if you didn't want sexual advances, you had a right to defend yourself up to and until killing the person, which this guy did. He killed that. So that's all in the book, is how these groups of kind of hip beatnik stuff. There was a lot going on.
Oh, nice.
Girl growing up. And so I learned Greenwich Village is still one of my favorite places in the world, although it's no longer the same. But that's me. And then I went to college, and then I became, what I said, a tap dancer for the American people.
Wow. What was your hardest scene to write in that book?
Say it again?
What was your hardest scene to write in that book?
Huh. You don't want me crying on the broadcast, right? I wrote a scene at the very end where one of the main characters is dying, and the protagonist is at the hospital with him, but for once her father has come with her to give her some comfort. That was the hardest thing to write because it was real. The guy really did die. This is a real person who ran United Press International, and he lived in my house. He was one of the many, many people who lived there. It's just brownstone. They didn't live there all together. But okay, the hardest scene to write was his death, because I was sitting outside the hospital with my father and thinking about his death. So that was the hardest scene.
Oh, man. Did you have to do a lot of research for this book?
Oh, yes. Even though they had lived in my house and I knew a lot of, my family didn't know that this guy had killed someone. My father didn't know that. And when I found out about it years after my father had died. So the research I did was on the beat poets
Wow.
and that time in Greenwich Village, because I had lived part of my time there. And I had to do a lot of research because my dad's not here. I had one friend left who was 20 years older than me, who had actually published at Random House, published all the Black Panther books. And I could talk to him about that period of time, and then he died. So that period of time closed, and the book is really important to me because it's information about that. I don't think very many people know that there was a murderer among the beat poets he got away with it on this grounds of what I said, honor killing, don't touch me, I'm not gay. And then he got away with it because Allen Ginsberg, this isn't important, but it's important history, and it's in the book, and I tell it in a, you can have a good time.
It's a made up story, even though these characters, there's some wonderful fictional characters who interact with these real characters. Yeah. So it's fun that way too.
So this is a fictional story? Like you haven't met these people? Like
I met some of them. Sure.
oh,
It depends. What I've done with the book is to chronologically sort of use time periods that I needed. So sometimes I jump from 15 to 22 because you know what I mean? I needed to say she ran into an old college friend, and that doesn't work if she's 15. I met, I knew Paul Robeson. I knew Lucian Carr, the guy who committed the murder I had met, but I was young, and nobody knew that. Nobody knew who he was in that way, because he was sort of the entrepreneur for the beat poets. He was sort of their salesman, and nobody mentioned that he had stabbed someone with his Boy Scout knife.
oh wow.
Yeah, it's a really interesting. Yeah, say you were going to ask me something. I'm sorry.
I was going to ask you, what is the beat poet? So like I feel like I need to go back to history class, because I'm like, what is this?
In the 1950s, a group of sort of weird, long-haired, pot-smoking poets and musicians got together in the village. The beats were everywhere, right? They were in San Francisco.
They were in, the beat movement was across the country, and it was a philosophy that took its notions from people who were dropping out, who had enough. Many of them were World War II veterans who didn't quite know how to put their lives together again. But the poetry movement was all the way from San Francisco and City Lights movement to the world that Susan's fictional character lives in, this young woman who lives in Greenwich Village. And in between, Colorado, Denver was a big central point for beat artists.
You know what? So
the beat philosophy.
So you don't have to go back to school for this. We can tell you simply. The beats preceded the hippies in a certain way. Beginning of the hippie movement, where I don't have to pay for that. I'll just pick that hat up and walk out because I'm a hippie. But the beats preceded them in many ways, in attitudes about society and what they were and were not going to tolerate in rules. And so there were rule breaking
anarchists,
mostly very literate. And you won't read much about the women, some of whom, Diane DePrima was a lovely, lovely beat poet. You can't find her. I found her, but you'll be shocked to know that the women weren't promoted as much as the men, and that's all I'll say.
Wow. So was it around the time Jimi Hendrix was around, like that time?
A little earlier.
Earlier?
Yeah.
Wow.
A little earlier. Yeah.
Okay. Now you know what the beats were. They preceded the hippies as a movement of poetry, music, and anarchy. I'll go with anarchy.
Yeah. People who idealized the idea of freedom, but also lived very imperfectly. They were very messed, So there's a conflict of this sort of utopian notion of things, and then these people who were living very messy lives, very funky lives. So it was quite an interesting time.
Nice. And where can my listeners, I'm going to bring this back up. Where can my listeners find your book?
Amazon?
Yeah, I mean, Amazon, it's also, you can go into any bookstore and order these books. All of these books are published by Harvard Square Editions.
Except, mine too.
Yeah, so, and what that means is that they are distributed by Ingram. And so you can walk into your local bookstore and say, I would like to order this book, The Road Not Taken by Susan Rubin, and within 2 or 3 days, they'll have it there for you. Otherwise, it's on bookshop.org. If you know that site, that's a good site, because some of the money goes to bookstores. It's quite as horrendous as Amazon, but they're all on Amazon. They're right there.
Oh, okay. Do you have any of your books on audiobook yet?
No. Isn't that a great idea?
It's a great And someone started to talk to us about it, but I'm sure you know from just running your own broadcast like this, do you have a full-time job as well, or is this your full-time job?
I have a full-time job as well.
And you're going to school.
Yep, and going to school, struggling. No, I'm not struggling yet.
Yeah, that's good. It is.
That's it.
You're doing that, right? Moving the way the screen looks. I'm not.
Yeah, I'm moving it.
Oh, okay.
So I wanted to go into Charles' books now. So I was going through your website too, as well, and I was looking at these. So can you tell us a little bit about your books as well?
Sure. This is actually, as you can see up there in the at the top under the title, Gates of Eden. This is the first volume of the Resistance trilogy. And the Resistance trilogy basically is, each book is set in a different domain of the resistance during the 60s, the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, the beginnings of the Earth consciousness movement, and of course, feminism as well. So all of these books have to do with people who were going against the stream, going against the mainstream. And so Gates of Eden is the largest of the books, and it starts right after World War II, when we were all born, my generation, Susan's generation. And we grew up through the 50s, which was a very, sort of middle American time with a lot of hidden problems, in it. And so we were part of the generation who said, wait a minute, no, everything isn't great. Just because you can buy a new car every year that has a different tail fin on it, things aren't great. So Gates of Eden follows 5 people from various parts of the country, very diverse group of people who come of age during this time and become aware of the things that are going on wrong in our lovely America. And some of it's a little bit of it is set in Vietnam, but it tells the story of them coming of age and learning how to resist the system that they found to be unethical, illegal, immoral. So there's a lot of rough and tumble, and there's a lot of love. So the subtitle for all of these books is Tales of Resistance, Rebellion, and Love. And the love part of it is a big part. And I'm not just talking about sex here. I'm talking about, I don't know if you've ever heard of a man named Che Guevara.
No.
Che Guevara was one of the people who worked with Fidel Castro to free Cuba in the late 50s. And he said an interesting thing about this time. He said, it may sound ridiculous, but revolutionaries are guided by great feelings of love. And so I tried to pull all of that, is the excitement and the danger and the growth and the odds against these people, the way the police treated people. But in it all was love. It was a love for nation, love for community, love. So Gates of Eden is kind of a big arcing story that takes many almost 30 years span of time goes by from the end of World War II until the 70s.
So did you all get to meet anybody from the Black Panther Party? Like, did y'all did?
Yeah. I worked with them.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I worked with them in San Francisco.
I went to school with Angela Davis, but she's 10 years older than I am. But I went to school with her, high school. She was in the 12th grade when I was in the 6th grade. It was a middle and high school. I knew her then, and I was so moved by her when she was arrested. Do you know about the courthouse shootout?
Yeah, I remember that. I remember that. I did pay attention to history. I remember that part.
I went to the trial. I drove with my new boyfriend. We drove to the trial to watch it. It was really impressive because clearly I don't want to talk about the case, it's not important, but yes, I've met Angela Davis and what are the Black Panthers?
We had in
this
theater company that I was working in. The Black Panthers, as you know, get this terrible reputation, but they did some of the most amazing things with children and outreach. And one of their early efforts was to say, we are not just a Black separatist movement. We are trying to create liaisons with the larger community. And so I got to meet several of the Black Panthers, one of them named Bobby Hutton and the other one named Bobby Seale, who came to the theater company because they wanted to work with us. They wanted to have us interact with some of the problems that were happening in the neighborhood to give it a different perspective. So I had an amazing experience talking at length with Bobby Seale and this very young man, Bobby Hutton, who was killed by the Oakland police shortly thereafter. So that was a kind of and those kinds of stories come out in these books, even though they are real history. Mm-hmm. Again, like Susan, I put fictional characters into the story, so that you're following characters that are hopefully believable, but they're not real historical people. But they're interacting with Gates of Eden is the title of a Bob Dylan song. And there's a scene where two of the characters are interacting with Bob Dylan in Greenwich Village. So there's a lot of fun trying to figure out how to capture those kinds of interactions. Bobby Seale, Bob Dylan, amazing people. So.
Wow. What was your hardest scene to write in these books?
The endings are always the hardest.
Right, that's what I said.
It's like, okay, I got myself all the way here. How the heck do I get out of this situation? So just as a generalization, I would say the endings. There were very difficult parts because for example, in the next one, if you'll scroll down, I don't know if you can scroll down on the page. Okay, Bowl Full of Nails is a little bit more autobiographical. And in this story, this was set in the Back to the Land movement, where a lot of people who had been activists, say in the anti-war movement and the civil rights movement, had to get out. They just had to get out. Either they were being chased out or they had to get out. So this is a story of a young guy who has to get away from the cops and his own anger. So he goes to the mountains in Colorado. And along with the tale of him going to the mountains in Colorado to get away from it all, and he can't get away from it all, there's some interactions about his father. And that's kind of autobiographical. And some of that was very difficult because my father died under very difficult circumstances. So that whole sort of line through this A Bowl Full of Nails is a kind of a deep psychic look at some of the author's own blues and difficulties. So that is hard. That is tough to
do. What about this book right here?
Okay, this is actually, again, this is a different domain. This story is set in a radical theater company, very much like Susan's and mine. It's set during the late 60s when we were doing anti-war plays, and we would travel across the country visiting college campuses everywhere, because the college campuses were great areas of resistance and protest. So this is an invented story of a tour, a young man on a tour, and actually it's it's got some difficult personal things in it, because I was in fact in a company like that. Not this one. This one's made up, but a lot of the stuff that as a writer, for me, the self-exploratory stuff is hard.
Mhm.
You're going in just the way you would as if you were doing your own analysis of yourself as a psychologist. Difficult. So those were hard pieces, and just trying to get the sense of the excitement and the danger of what it was like to be on the left wing of political art, of politics and art. It was a difficult time. It wasn't all fun and games. It wasn't all just smoking dope and it was a difficult time, and so there was a lot of it was hard to recapture and remember what that was about.
Yeah, because a lot of the times, like my generation, we always say, oh, we want to go back to the 60s and see how it was back in the 60s and back in the 70s, because the way they make it look on TV is like, oh, that was a fun time to be in, like smoking.
It was.
I'd rather be there. I mean, I don't want to die and go back, but I'd rather be in the 70s than now. I get really tired of yes, there was a war going on, but now there's 3 wars going on, and it's very hard for people who have spent their life. I don't like people shooting other people.
Yeah.
It's just a hard time now, but it was a hard, your interest in the 70s and 60s and wanting to have been there. Spend a couple of months there in your mind. You know what I mean? Find your magical route. It was a really interesting time. People were really grappling with questions like we're grappling with now. Apparently, we didn't solve everything. I thought we had made things perfect.
But you're right. It was an exciting time, and there was a tremendous amount of beautiful sort of communal. Tremendous amount of community work that went on, and so much diversity. At the same time that all this other, we were getting hit over the head by cops all the time, and it was, but really it was groovy.
That's exactly what my grandmother said. I was asking my grandma, I was like, Grandma, was it better back then versus now? And she was like, yeah. She was like, it wasn't as bad as it is now.
It wasn't as ugly. It really, even though we were in a war then too, the day-to-day in this country is getting to be like, I'm not even talking about law and order. I'm just talking about stuff that people come out and say is horrifying. It's just horrifying. So that's the other reason to write, put another storyline out there that isn't about hating immigrants, that put different stories out there for people to choose how they want to look at the world. So that's what we've both tried to do.
But it was a difficult time, but as your grandma said,
go back there in your mind.
Go and listen to the music.
Oh yeah, the music is the music is.
Was your grandmother in where you are now in the 70s? Have you moved? Did you say you're in Louisville? No.
Yeah, I'm in Louisville. Yeah.
Is she there to work out where she experienced the 70s?
Yeah, because she's 73 now. Yeah, she's 73 now, and she's been in Louisville her life.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
she was definitely in the right place at the right time.
Oh yeah, she said she had a ball. She said she definitely had fun.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So, have you all always been in theater and all that? Because when I read y'all profile, I was like, I want their lives. I feel like I'm wasting my life, my little 36-year-old life.
You're doing great.
Fantastic. I wish I had had what you had.
Psychology, graduate degrees coming up.
You're doing great. We're just, we're at a different age, but you'll do as much as we've done by the time that time goes by. Anyway. I laud what you're doing. I think what you're doing is great. The blurb, the blog, everything. I don't know how you're doing it all, but it's nice. Would people normally have sent in questions, or do you?
usually, but since it's so late, then they're like, eh. So I'll replay it, and then you'll see the questions again, and then they'll start asking questions. So I'll replay it because it's so late here. It's like 10 o'clock here,
Yeah.
11.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
I just didn't want to think we were dull, but we're not.
So do y'all have any upcoming projects or anything that y'all have going on?
I have a new book. I am in the process of selling the 44 Horatio Street book. There's a bunch of interest in it, but as I'm sure you know, that takes time. I have a third book I'm writing, and I won't. It's about a woman who died a real woman who died, and it really sort of roiled me. And so I started to write about a woman who's handed a book that is the book of her life, but she doesn't know it.
Oh.
So she goes through it a sheet at a time, talking about her life, but she doesn't know she's talking about her life. So at the very end, she realizes the book was about her. That's going to be hard because obviously it requires a lot. So yeah, that's my next project, is a book about the world.
Nice.
We're also, I think we've mentioned it, but we're putting together presentations for places like the American Library Association, who have an interest in us because, well, hopefully because of our writing, but also because we've been together as a couple for a long time. So a lot of people go, how the heck do you write books and still live together? Like, how can you do that? So there's a kind of, people are interested in who we are as a couple, as well as who we are as individual writers, because we do give each other a lot of support and perspective in terms of our writing. You know, the first time that I write something, who's going to see it first? Susan.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to that. So we're doing some presentations for the American Library Association. We may, because we're old folks now. We're the American Association of Retired Persons, AARP, wants us to also do some stuff about people who are still writing, you know, even though they're like, 150 years old, So we're doing some presentations like that. And then, like Susan says, we're both working on new projects at the same time.
That's amazing. I hope I found my person like y'all found each other. That's nice.
Yeah.
It's, it is the safest place to be, is with a partnership that works.
Yeah.
I don't see a lot of them, but this one has worked.
Yeah.
And we're talking to you. And did you say you were 36?
36, yeah.
What?
I don't look like it.
Yes. And what you're doing is amazing. Do you do this every day, this blurb thing?
Just on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, because I have to have time to study. So
wow, that's a lot. Do you have a lot of people watching you?
Quite a few. I get a lot of emails from people. They're like, "Oh, we love your podcast, and we love the people you have on." I'm like, "Oh, thank you."
That's great.
That's yeah,
that's great. You're doing it. And what do you want to do now? What do you want to do with these podcasts?
I want to inspire people and help people. That's my whole goal, to inspire people.
That's who we are too. Story, really telling people's story, I think, is how people learn.
Dark times, we're just trying to bring things up during dark times.
Oh yeah, definitely. So my last and final question before I let you go, what advice would you two give authors who are starting out?
Who goes first? Just do it. If you don't want to do it, forget it. You can go sell ice cream. It's easier. But if it's what you want to do, is to express yourself and to, what you said, teach kindness and not just bland stuff. If you really want to tell people what you think the world is like and what it needs, it's really good to have an outlet. And if you have that talent, it's a terrible waste not to use it. I won't say it is not fun to be an individual artist in any society. That's just hard. Yeah. If you can accept at the beginning, which I haven't yet, that, and I've been writing a long time, if you can accept that it's hard and you still want to do it, then you really have no reason not to do it, because you're communicating with the world what you learned about life. That's what I think. Your turn.
And the other thing, what you'll hear a lot, of course, is just keep writing. And yes, absolutely, that's true. Keep writing, because it's a craft, and it does become something you need to develop. But the other thing I would say is write about things that mean something to you. It's too hard to do if it's just you trying to guess what the next thriller might be, and that you want to write a screenplay. Write what's important to you. If it's about your life, and write about your life. If it's about something that goes on in the world, or something you imagine going on in the world that's important, write about it. But have it be important. It gives you the energy you need to move ahead.
Yes, this is really great advice. I want to thank you both so much for being guests today on my podcast.
It was a pleasure. And I love your living room. I just have to say that it's startlingly beautiful. Call us again sometimes.
Thank you, Brooke. It was really a pleasure.
It was lovely to talk to you.
You too. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey everyone, thank you all so much for listening to She Blurs podcast, and for my guests Susan and Charles. Thank you all so much for being guests. And if you all would like to purchase their books, Charles's books is on his website, which is charlesdingleman.org. That's his website. And then Susan's is susanrubinwriter.com. So you can go to their website and purchase their books, or you can go to Amazon and purchase their books. And they also speak about where else you can get their books from. So I hope to see you next time for the next interview. And thank you all so much for listening to She Blurs podcast. See you next time. Bye.